Greetings. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks, Sr., your host, and this is Community Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with two exemplary professionals this evening. Dr. Thomas Rudd, Lake County Coroner. To my extreme left and to my immediate left is Attorney Matthew Stanton. He's a counselor at law here in Lake County. And these are two people that you should know. Ladies and gentlemen, Lake County is approximately 750,000 people, and Comcast coverage is approximately 100,000 people. And we are a better county if we have more information that we can promulgate to our audience. Greetings, folks.
Hello, Doctor.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with Attorney Stanton, my immediate left here, to tell our listening audience, who is Attorney Stanton? Tell us a little bit about your personal and professional background.
All right. Well, my name is Matt Stanton. I've been an attorney in Lake County for around a dozen years. Mm-hmm. I have a private practice in Gurnee, my office. Also spent the last 8 years, maybe 10 years as an adjunct faculty as a law professor at one of the law schools in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Prior to my becoming an attorney, I worked in the schools and as a counselor at one of the colleges, and I attended law school while I was raising my children. I was a single parent with 5 children. When those kids were old enough for me to take a night class or two, that's when I enrolled in law school. And I'd come back in the evening and we'd all hit the books together.
Well, tell us this, what piqued your interest in law?
Well, I always had an interest in law from the time I was small, along with many other things. I think when I made the decision to go back to school, again, I didn't go back to college until I was a little bit older. I don't have the same background that a lot of attorneys have. I thought raising these 5 kids is a difficult enough job. What else can I do that's going to be challenging?
Okay.
I thought, well, how about law school? Certainly get that done and out of the way while I was used to carrying the heavy load.
Well, tell us about some of the challenging experiences you've had since being an attorney.
Well, going back, one of the reasons that I did become an attorney is because it's a sincere desire to help people. It seemed to me to be the best profession with my set of skills, in my view, to go about that. So the biggest challenge is sometimes you run into cases where the law just doesn't quite fit, where it doesn't solve the whole problem. It's especially true in family cases. Also sometimes in my criminal defense work, I've run into that.
Okay, we're going to give Dr. Rudd the same opportunity I've given you to let him tell us a little bit about his personal and professional background. Dr. Rudd, this is not the first time you've been on Community Forum, but there may be people in the audience watching that do not know who Dr. Rudd is, and they should know a little bit about the Lake County Coroner.
Especially if they live in Fox Lake.
Okay.
I am a physician and surgeon licensed in the state of Illinois. I practiced out here from 79 to 93, helping run the laboratories at Lake Forest Highland Park Hospitals. I'm a pathologist by trade.
Okay.
In 94, I became medical director of anatomic pathology at Quest Diagnostics and retired in 1993 to take care of my mother who was at the end stage of Alzheimer's. It was during that time, pardon me, that I heard about the the coroner's office being up for election.
Okay.
The man that was in there had to step down, and they put somebody else in who I thought wasn't qualified, so I decided to run in 2012. I thought it would be a fairly easy job. and it would be kind of boring, but it turned out to be anything but because of some of the cases we've had to handle, specifically the Hanna case, the Justice Howell case, the Melissa Kalazinski case, and of course the Fox Lake case. All four cases ended up being somewhat controversial, but all four cases had the right decisions made.
I spoke with Attorney Stanton about challenging experiences, but those four cases were really challenging, and we may get into those as we will get into those as we go along. But I'd like to know the qualifications of a coroner.
Qualifications for a coroner are minimal. This is unfortunate, but it is. Basically, you have to be 18 years old, a United States citizen. I'm not sure if you even have to have a high school degree. I think you may if you have to be 18. So I'm assuming that you have to have a high school degree, but I'm not absolutely certain. But basically 18 and no felonies. That's it.
Wow.
That's amazing. I mean, I always assumed that there was a medical qualification.
No, none whatsoever. Without using the whole hour about how the coroner system developed, it was actually the first inheritance tax. King Richard had run out of ways of taxing the citizens of England. I think it was 1162. So he decided, well, what's a new way of getting tax? And his people got together and said, well, let's tax every estate when somebody dies. So he sent out 3 knights and a tax collector, 4 people to collect a coin of the realm. And in Latin, coin is corona, or crown, and as well as coin. And so that's how we got the term a coroner. He was to collect a coin for every time somebody died in England. It came over here in the United States because we were a colony of England, so we followed their rules. It subsequently became a office that was to document death. And then I think after it not only documented death in terms of excising a tax, but the concept of finding out who commits murder became a role. I think it's lex murderorum is the term from who committed the crime. So the coroner was in charge of determining any wrongful deaths as well as natural deaths. And then around the turn of the century, it was decided that you really needed a medical expert because at that time poisoning citizens in terms of murder became very commonplace, and the average coroner couldn't decide how to examine that. Unfortunately, there are more counties than there are pathologists that can do it. That's why we have to have a lay person do the manner of death. The cause of death still has to be done by a physician. But the optimal way of doing it is to have a medical examiner, but it's very difficult because there's not many people that want it or who are qualified to do it.
I was wondering, since this is such a valuable forum that we're having, about the statutes. You mentioned about are the requirements different from counties about the statutes?
No, each county has the same statute for coroner.
Okay.
I'm not certain about state's attorney, but
as far as the state's attorney it's contained in the Illinois Constitution. The qualifications are that you're a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois.
Okay.
You're not even required to be a resident of the county, actually. But you do, in the case of the state's attorney, there is that professional qualification of being a licensed attorney.
To be a state's attorney, you do not have to live in the county
you are
that
you're serving as state's attorney.
Yes,
that's unusual.
Very unusual. These are type of things that people should know. And this is why, because we've had several examples here in Lake County. We had one coroner, for example. I think she was a licensed beautician.
Yes.
And I know she was a secretary and coroner. She was a coroner for quite some time. And then we had one retired police officer.
Correct.
And we had a case where he determined, cause of death was determined as
undetermined. On Darren Hanna.
Undetermined.
Correct.
So that's why Attorney Stanton and I agree that a person should be a medical examiner, a medical person.
Well, any position in government should have some requirements that meet the needs of the office, and they're very lax, so to speak, in terms of the coroner.
Well, a lot of people as well are not all that familiar exactly what the coroner's duties are, or the state's attorney. I mean, these are very powerful positions, elected political positions.
Well, let's start with that. First of all, you may want to continue. What are the duties of a state's attorney?
Well, the primary duty, and what most people understand, is the state's attorney prosecutes crime, charged with public safety. The state's attorney also has a civil role, prosecuting white-collar crime, but also defending the county if the county's being sued for something. Now, I think it's worth mentioning that, and this is the way I think of it, is that the state's attorney has a lot of power deciding on what to prosecute. There's no real check on that power. So we do express our political values through how the state's attorney's office is choosing to go about prosecuting crime. The state's attorney does not really work for the state. He works for the people. That's why when there's a criminal case, it's the people of the state of Illinois versus whoever the defendant is. And that duty is owed to the people. I think that's why it's so important to have public trust in this position. And the state's attorney, I think, finally has to pursue justice. And that pursuit of justice involves getting at the truth, whatever that might be. State's attorney should be just as interested in a defendant's innocence as he is in guilt, because we're trying to get at what the truth of the matter is.
So the citizens, even though he represents the citizens, if there's the citizen will have to get his approval to prosecute a case. State's attorney has the last word then, right? There's no appeal. He
not
decided
to the process of who's going to prosecute, that's correct. It typically, the police will come to the state's attorney's office with a case. The state attorney is going to examine that case to see what the evidence is like, if it's a strong case, if it's not so strong. That's why there's a state attorney cannot just simply go on a hunch. There has to be evidence. There has to be, DNA, physical evidence, witnesses, or confessions. We might want to talk about that a little later too.
Okay. Dr. Rudd, you want to tell us the duties of the coroner's office?
Well, one thing that people may not know is that we are considered law enforcement. We are considered part of law enforcement.
The coroner's the highest, isn't it?
Correct. Well, he's equal. He's actually equal to the sheriff. Generally, if the sheriff is undergoing investigation and arrest, the coroner can arrest him, and the coroner would take over the sheriff's office. So he's equal in terms of power, and probably the only one who can arrest him in that case. But it is a law enforcement agency. We are under Law and Judicial Committee in Lake County. We report to them just like the state's attorney does.
Did you not recently win an award on that?
Oh, thank you.
I want to have...
well, it's great that you brought that up.
The
Illinois Association of Law Enforcement Executives.
That's correct.
This has recently happened. Matter of fact, I got the release here February 29th, 2016, so we read the same information coming out.
That was not given to me. I saw that in the news.
That was, just recently. I think it was, we had a presentation, I think, at the end of February.
Yeah, February 29th.
And I'm one of 6 recipients since the existence of the award. And it was
one of 6 coroners, or
no, 6 law enforcement types.
probably the only.
For instance, I think Ray Rose of the Sheriff's Office was a recipient in the past. But it's anybody in law enforcement, be it coroner, be it Sheriff's Office, be it State's Attorney's Office. But it's important to know that we are a law enforcement agency.
And here, there's some great language here. If you don't,
Go ahead.
if you don't mind, if I haven't seen this before. The multiple high-profile investigations while he has been the Lake County coroner, Dr. Rudd has demonstrated that he's willing to be an independent thinker and exhibited admirable willingness to seek the truth, regardless of how popular his actions might be.
Thank you.
That's,
Yeah, and this is what
to me, that's courage. That's courage.
here. I know that you may not have seen this either. The coroner honored for pursuit of truth,
That's the title of the
and I think that's key there. You mentioned
well,
about
that's
that.
what we were talking about.
Right,
is
right.
that is the core mission of justice. You can't have justice
Right.
if you don't get at what the truth is.
And I think that title can apply to State's Attorney, can apply to Sheriff's Office, can obviously apply to the Coroner's Office. I mean, we are to seek the truth and to provide protection of the citizens of Lake County. But the ultimate goal of our office is to determine the cause and manner of death. And the way we do that is by examining the scene where somebody dies. It sometimes may require an autopsy, generally in cases, well, always in cases of homicide, sometimes in suicide, sometimes, well, almost always in accidents, because that can affect inheritance and insurance companies. But generally, most of our deaths are natural. And for instance, we average about 4,500 deaths a year.
Whoa.
About 500 are actually examined by our office. The vast majority, the death certificates are signed out by the attending physician in natural deaths. In an unnatural death, homicide, suicide, or accident, we take over and we determine the manner of death that way. We also have a secondary role of public health. Remember, since we're documenting every death, we document every death and how they die, be it the attending physician signing the death certificate or us. We watch for certain diseases that are occurring in the county. And if they're serious, we alert the family and then the public health department. An example, meningitis. We recently had a child who died of meningitis. They didn't know she had meningitis. We did the autopsy. We suspected it. We did a culture of the brain. We watched it day by day to get the culture. We found out the organism. We contacted the family. We tested the family. We went to the school, tested the kids, and luckily nobody else was affected. But had they been cultured, we would have treated and prevented further meningitis cases. And so we are a public health function also.
You mentioned manner of death. You want to talk about?
There are basically 5 manners of death. There
Okay.
is a natural death, meaning you die of cancer or a heart attack or something like that. Then you have homicide, which does not necessarily mean murder. Homicide means somebody causing the death of another. The intent is to be determined by law enforcement, such as police and the State's Attorney's Office. You obviously know what suicides are, and you know what homicides are. So we have 4 so far. There is a 5th one where it's rarely used, it's less than 1%, and that's called undetermined, where we don't really know what was the actual cause of somebody dying. And the vast majority of those cases are cases called sudden infant death syndrome. Okay, these are cases where a child would be put to bed next morning. Child would be dead, and there would be no autopsy findings that were specific to the cause.
Now, if I may interject, when we're talking about determining the cause, we're talking about getting to the truth of the thing. And would you say in most of these cases what you're using scientific evidence?
Correct.
Correct?
That's correct.
Something that's testable, that can be verified,
Correct.
that medical science has proven.
Right. That's correct. For instance, with a natural death, there's always a physician in charge of the patient, and he can relate to us, the treatment, et cetera, and he will then sign it out. There are some physicians that are afraid to do that. They say, well, I haven't seen the patient in a month, and then I'll review the chart and I'll determine. And if I don't think it's enough information from the chart, then I can do the autopsy. And obviously, when you do an autopsy, it's a scientific study. Okay. It's an important last final exam in this patient's presence on Earth, and so we use physicians trained to do this. And those are the 5 major causes. And as I was saying before, sudden infant death syndrome was always labeled undetermined because there are no anatomic findings as to why this child died. We now know from years of experience now that it's a positional asphyxia. We now know that until you see your child able to turn himself over, either from his stomach to his back or his back to his stomach, you are never to put him in a crib except back down. Okay? Because if they can't turn over, if you put them down face forward and their nose hits the bed and they can't breathe, they don't have the strength to flip themselves over yet, they die of basically asphyxiation.
I'd like to ask Attorney Stanton, is the ultimate goal of an attorney to be a judge?
No.
You know, it's...
no, actually, I mean, the goal of an attorney is to be an advocate, generally speaking. I mean, a prosecutor's goal is to advocate on behalf of the people, but a good attorney understands both sides of every question. A hallmark of intelligence is being able to entertain an idea without necessarily accepting it. And I think that's a useful way to think about looking at both sides, weighing the balances. So an attorney we have what's called an adversarial system in our country, where we believe that the best way to get at the truth is having 2 parties opposed to one another and each one trying to prove their case. And the judge or the jury, in the case of a trial, they are the triers of fact. They are the ultimate ones that determine what the judgment is. And there's many times I've had cases where I thought they'd go one way and they went the opposite. And that's not an unusual situation.
What determines then whether an attorney would be a state's attorney or not?
Well, again, a state's attorney is a prosecutor.
Okay.
They prosecute crime. There's, I think that the chief role of the state's attorney is one of leadership. Okay. There's an old saying that in some prosecutor's office that say it's an easy thing to convict a guilty person, but it's a challenge to convict an innocent person.
Okay.
Now that's said often as almost a joke, but I don't think that's very funny. We've had cases in our county. Lake County's notorious for wrongful convictions. The county has been sued for tens of millions of dollars in wrongful conviction lawsuits. There's one that came out today. Is a Jason Strong case.
Jason Strong case.
Is the latest in that pipeline. And that money does not come from the state's attorney's operating fund. It doesn't come from the city. It comes from the general taxpayer funds that could be used for other things. But there's a lot of reasons why these wrongful convictions are tragic. Taxpaying, the monies that they cost is one thing, and that everybody feels it, but there's also the wrong that's being done to the wrongfully convicted. And if you've got the wrong person in prison, the real criminal's still out there somewhere.
Yeah, we've read in the paper several wrongful convictions. I don't know, Rivera case, I guess, is one.
Rivera, Benny Starks, Jerry Hobbs, a father that was actually confessed to murdering his own daughter and her friend. There becomes a pattern emerges with all of these cases, and almost all of them, I think maybe not one of those cases, maybe it was the Starks case, but all of them involve confessions. These are people
wrongful confessions.
Well, all of the first thing is all of these wrongful convictions, they were actually innocent. In other words, It's not that there was a legal technicality, like somebody forgot to get their Miranda rights or police misconduct or something that got these guys off. They were actually innocent. That they confessed shows we've got problems with the interrogation techniques that are being used here. That seems to be a pattern.
Well, we read about Chicago, the many wrongful convictions there, but we don't think about it in our own county.
Well, one of the reasons I think we don't think about it enough, I mean, because we need to be thinking about it, is Chicago's has the John Burge cases, for example.
Yeah.
It's sort of a central organizing principle to tell the story about. Everyone knows kind of what a John Burge case is, they have the, you know, what it involves. Here, I think what we have is all of these cases that involve confessions. We have to start looking at what these interrogation techniques were like, that they're psychologically manipulative, that they suggest details to the person that just wants to get out of the room that's being gone through the interrogation, the Reed technique and things like that. And I think the state's attorney's job in a situation like that is if police make an arrest, they bring the case to the state's attorney's office, the state's attorney has to look at what kind of case it is, what sort of evidence it is. And if you have a case that that's absent DNA, absent a weapon, absent multiple witnesses, that case needs to be looked at pretty close. Certainly I would examine closely what the interrogation was like.
I think the key article that I found was in November of 2011, and it was in the New York Times Magazine. It's called The Prosecution's Case Against DNA. These are the 6 cases that not only did the DNA free them, they all 6 had coerced confessions. Okay, and when you read this article, at the time of November of 2011, this was the longest and most detailed article ever printed by the New York Times Magazine.
Wow.
It's probably
True, and everybody should look at that. When, Dr. Brooks, when you say that we don't talk about it, that I think is changing. And I hope one of the things that my candidacy does is, at the very least, it will have succeeded if it gets this into the discussion and we all start to learn and know about it. We need to be talking about these things here.
The problem with these cases, as Mr. Stanton said, it costs the county money. It costs all of us citizens money. For instance, the Juan Rivera case is $21 million. We are now
the highest in United States history.
Right. We are now averaging $1 million per year in jail for wrongful convictions. So when the state's attorney fights cases like the Melissa Kalazinski case, every month, every year that she stays in jail, we, the citizens, will be forking out the money. And maybe Mr. Stanton can address this, and there's no answer really, but he can discuss it. You cannot prosecute a state's attorney even if he willingly does something wrong. It's very, very difficult. It's rare. Once in a while you can, but he can do as he damn well pleases, and he does not have to worry about being prosecuted.
Even though the evidence could point to that?
That's a very interesting point. As I've thought about this, I think with the advent of DNA and other ways of gaining evidence and all the wrongful convictions, that we are starting to think about a little more, well, where does this stuff come from? How does it originate? And one of the things I think we miss is how much unchecked power exists at the state's attorney's office, as I spoke about earlier, choosing what to prosecute and how, and what sort of checks are in place. Now, you might not be able to indict a state's attorney, but there could be accountability, and I wonder why there's not accountability somewhere in that office or in that chain for some of these cases that keep coming up. Melissa Kalazinski case is, well, you could speak about,
this is a case that I was asked to review by the defense attorney for Melissa. When I went over the materials without going in great detail, they were shockingly missed. The details were that of allegedly of an acute injury, and the findings anatomically are anything but. They're a chronic injury, they're an old injury. It was confirmed by one of the top 10 forensic pathologists in the nation, Dr. Nancy Jones, who works for this office. We reviewed this case for the last 3.5 years at national conventions of forensic pathology. I stopped counting after 50. Those who agreed with me have yet to find anybody to disagree with me, and the state's attorney has had this case, has had the written report from Dr. Jones for almost 3 years, and he has yet to find any forensic expert to disagree with it. And yet he refuses, digs his heels in, and says he's not going to present this case to his wrongful conviction committee that he set up just for cases like this.
Yeah, I hear Jones was that a pathologist?
Yes, she's a forensic pathologist, one of the top 10 in the nation. Dr. Nancy Jones, she works for me in my office.
Now, did she agree that she made an error?
No, she didn't make the error. There was another pathologist who made the error. She examined this other pathologist's work. Now, what's also interesting, thanks for bringing it up, after Dr. Jones reviewed the case and wrote a report, and then we presented to the state's attorney, who refused to answer my letter when I presented it to him, I then interviewed the pathologist who made the mistake, and we had a collegial and cooperative discussion of the findings, and he agreed that he made a terrible mistake and signed an affidavit saying he missed it.
Wow.
And it gets even worse than that. After that, we present the affidavit to the state's attorney. He again ignores it. And then several weeks later, we get an anonymous phone call that there's an x-ray in our department that clearly shows that the child who died did not have a skull fracture. And I actually brought this x-ray here.
And this is some of the scientific truth evidence that you were referring to. And you brought this to your state's attorney.
Right. And we told him that we now have evidence there's no skull fracture. This film here, just pay attention to this. It's a head shot and upper body shot. As you can see, it's all white. Okay, and that means that this is either overdeveloped or raw data. And so this x-ray, to most people, to most experts in the field of medicine, is uninterpretable. You can't interpret that there's a skull x-ray here. The reason is, it's raw data. Okay, it's a computerized image, and you have to adjust this image to get a good x-ray. So when the defense attorney asked for the x-rays to defend Melissa, they gave them this image, but did not tell them how to adjust the data to get a good image. So the defense attorney then contacted the prosecutorial attorney and said, my pathologist says these images are worthless. Can you give us better ones? They came back and said, this is all we got. What they didn't tell the defense attorney, that there was a little icon in the bottom right of this image that you clicked onto. And when you did, you produced this image, an excellent image of the skull and rib cage. This they withheld for the defense to obtain. And when you look at this, 4 experts have read this x-ray. All 4 said there is no skull fracture. And that was one of the main prosecutorial pieces of evidence that he had a skull fracture. There is no skull fracture. And yet when we present this to the state's attorney,
Which was considered the cause of death.
The cause of death was
the
bleeding
trial.
on the brain.
Okay, by the skull fracture.
Alleged skull fracture. Now, when this evidence is presented and it goes now before the courts for a potential retrial, the state's attorney's office can't even get the evidence correct of what we gave them. They said that these new images are nothing but brighter images from this. Now, anybody with any common sense could tell you that this bad image is the brighter image. This is not a brighter image compared to this. They can't even get their story straight. Okay, and yet they're going to court denying Melissa's release. This is a darkened image of this bright image that they claim is on the left. So,
and one of the points of fighting the motion to reopen the Melissa's case is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the state's attorney saying this is not new evidence.
correct. And it is new.
Well, I think it's new from listening to you and talking about it. But what occurs to me as well is that we've got a state's attorney's office that should be interested in getting to the truth of the matter instead of arguing what would amount to a legal technicality. I mean, most people don't like it if a truly guilty person is released because of a legal technicality. But here we have a perverse opposite of that. We've got a very likely innocent girl in prison, and they want to keep her there on a legal technicality. I mean, the state's attorney's office could approach this in different ways, but they're choosing to dig in and fight. They could, if a case is strong enough, the evidence is strong enough, the state's attorney could move to vacate the conviction.
But
what they could do short of that is they could join the defense's motion to reopen and have a new trial.
It's his decision. I
Yes,
thought
that's the point.
what
Thank you,
the
Ben.
court has, the judge have a decision to have another trial or not?
Well, this is the other problem with the judicial system. It takes forever and forever to have a court review materials. Every time they decide to do something, they wait 3 months. Then they have a 5-minute meeting and say we need some more time. For instance, I think it's about a year that the Lake County Court decided to take this case up again. It's about a year, and they've had the new evidence for a year, and yet at the last meeting in April 25th or 26th, remember, they've had this for almost a year. They said, well, before we decide whether or not to have a retrial, we're going to have to study this evidence. It's 1.5 feet thick. Well, what have you been doing for a year and a year? What have you been doing for a year? You've had that evidence for a year, and now you're asking for another delay. Quite frankly, I think they just want to delay this trial until after the election. Okay? I think this is political, what's going on in the courts.
Wow. Then you have, at the bottom, you have 2 other images.
These are just images of the lower part of the child. This is like mid-abdomen down to the pelvis and extremities. What's interesting about these images, by the way, is when the prosecution went after Melissa, they said that the injury to this child was this child had been thrown from a 2-story building. Yet the images of the skeletal system show, without question, no broken bones. How do you fall 2 stories, as if it was a 2-story throw, and not break any bones?
They said it had the blunt force of the equivalency of a.
That's correct. Fall. Okay, and not one bone is broken. Not one. So.
Well, Attorney Stanton, tell us the structure of the State's Attorney's Office.
Well, the state's attorney is in charge, as we talked about, and the prosecutors are assistant state's attorneys.
Okay.
And that can be structured in different ways. It's a thing that I intend to do if I'm elected, is to examine that. There's felony review. There's an assistant state's attorney that would be in charge of felony cases, misdemeanor cases, traffic court. There's a child support division that's a very important part of the office that enforces child support payments. So you have
then you got a
charge of
civil.
that. Yeah, and then there's a whole side of us, the civil attorneys and the civil law, of defending the county. The county's being sued, and those sorts of things.
And on the other side, you have a public defender, but
on the other side of a criminal,
the state's attorney don't get involved in public defender, right?
The criminal justice system is you've got the prosecutor's office. And they're charged with safety, which is very important. The public defenders, there for people that can't afford their own attorney under the U.S. Constitution's guarantees of being represented. And typically the public defender would do the same job advocating for the accused as a private attorney would do. And, you know, they have a heavy caseload.
I want to, and I'm sure our listening audience would like to know too, why are there so many minorities, and that's Hispanics, especially blacks, out of proportion serving in prisons than other segments of the population?
I think there's a few reasons. One is wherever there's poverty and economic disadvantage, there's going to be more crime. That's statistically is the case. Mm-hmm. But I think what is also very important is that diversity is something that we need to have represented in all facets of our society.
Okay.
There are there's bias that exists in human civilization. It's in the cases of it in the courts, and we have a lot of the bias. I'm searching for how I want to express this. There's a lot of bias that is unconscious. In situations that are very fast developing, like police work, where there's not a lot of information to gather, people are going to go toward what they think, what their preconceived notions are. And I think that that would change not only with training, police training and prosecutors being trained, but also having more people of color in that prosecutor's office. It's not representative of Lake County. Lake County is a lot of things. It's urban, it's suburban, there's even some rural areas. There's some of the wealthiest areas of the country on the North Shore, and then we've got poverty in these urban areas. And
Dr. Rudd, do you agree that poverty is the main cause of minorities? Now,
well, I wouldn't.
Maybe
Dr.
I can give a lead.
I wouldn't say it's the main cause.
Okay, that's what I was.
It's a contributing factor, but I really think that attitudes have to change. And one of the ways to have those attitudes change is to have people in place, minorities in place, in the office, in the judiciary.
Okay.
I think it's not only the black population, other minorities. You also see it in poor white areas where they just assumed. The problem is if you have a criminal record, that biases you right away as far as law enforcement. When you look at Darren Hanna, okay, they basically he had a record of drug use, and he therefore is viewed as a bad person, and therefore they'll do as they see fit to subdue him. The same thing with I'm trying to think, James Edwards. Okay, same thing with Benny Starks. I forget which one of them actually had served time for a murder. Okay, and they decided, well, this is not a nice man, so it doesn't matter if we put him away. He's done crime before. We'll get him out of circulation and put him in jail again. But the problem is this: the man who's out there who committed the murder is still committing murders. And that's what turned out with, I think, either Edwards or Starks. They brought somebody in. I know for a fact, I think Hobbs. I don't know if they ever found the person that killed his daughter.
Yeah, there's a guy named Therese.
Okay.
And actually, I just want to mention it briefly. The state's attorney here in Lake County is going to prosecute this Therese, even though Therese is currently under, it's either 3 or 4 life sentences for subsequent crimes and 1 federal death sentence. I have the question, what's the point of prosecuting somebody that's never going to be released unless it's some kind of show trial during a political year? But Dr. Rudd's point that when you have the wrong person, the real perpetrator's still out there.
And in terms of the coroner's office, in terms of minorities and poverty, as Mr. Stanton said, when you're poor, you're unhealthy. You eat the wrong things because you only can eat whatever store is open in your desert of food stores. You get addicted to legal drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. Okay, I used to walk around when I campaigned. I said there's basically 2 reasons why people die early: not having a job and tobacco. I still think it's factual. Okay, we know tobacco causes virtually every illness in your body. It causes heart disease, it causes diabetes, it causes kidney disease, it causes cancer, it causes narrowing of the artery, it causes Alzheimer's, you name it. But not having a job is the other reason people die early.
I'm going to have another program on poverty because if we talk about minorities and all blacks, you know, if they cannot afford an attorney, then that would be, you know, a cause for the more to be incarcerated.
Oh,
All right.
You are 100% correct, because even if somebody proves to be innocent, they don't have the money to bond out. They're already in jail, doing jail time because they can't afford not to. And they more likely get a plea agreement where they get charged with something and very tall, and they'll throw them a deal for something small, and for those very reasons, a lot of people plea to crimes.
Agreed, Dr. Rudd?
Yes.
Plea deal. More plea deals are from minorities than others. Also, the administering of for the crime sentencing, for example, is sentencing equitable? That has something to do with poverty too, you're right?
Well, I think Mr. Stanton can speak to that, but I can't understand sentences. Some people get these inordinate sentences.
Okay.
Some people get these small sentences. For instance, you look at the former House Speaker, he got 15 months, and he was a serial child molester, and he got 15 months.
Yeah.
I mean, whereas Blagojevich negotiates a seat in the House, or excuse me, in the Senate. He's trying to sell his Senate seat to the highest bidder, and he gets, what, 15 years or something? I can't remember, but the absurd number of years. You know, I think he should be punished, but it should be based on the severity, whereas Denny Hastert gets to keep his House of Representative pension. He gets to keep his state of Illinois pension. The only thing he lost was his school pension. I think if you can get convicted of something that's dastardly, you just get cut off from all your monies.
I think in his case he was convicted, though, of violating banking regulations, which sort of limited. But Dr. Brooks, if I understood you correctly, you're saying is there disparity in sentencing between races, and I think statistically there's no doubt about that. I think that's why Dick Durbin's working hard on sentencing reform. And I heard him speak just last month where he said his votes in the early 90s to toughen federal sentencing was his biggest regret and mistake, because, not because he likes crime, no, you know, we're not talking about, you know, serious violent crime here that people like, but he said because of the way that it was applied and that it turned out after all these years to essentially mass incarcerate a whole generation of black males in such high numbers, such disproportionate numbers.
Also, like I say, we need a separate program to discuss this in detail, because it's worthy of several programs, really. But the type of drugs, too, there's cocaine, and there's, you know, I'm not familiar with them because I'm not a user, right?
But you're talking about the crack cocaine sentencing?
Yeah, there's a difference, and
That's exactly the type of thing Durbin was talking about, was that the crack cocaine was more prevalent in the concentrated urban poverty areas. What we see now, I think, with the concern about heroin is because heroin has moved into the suburbs. And when you start to see that, and when the problem has a white face on it, it becomes more urgent. It will become, exactly. It becomes more urgent. It's moving up through society, and I think, I just want to make this one point about it. I think in every political office, even one that's not overtly political like the state's attorney or the coroner, I think we have to enlarge our view of what we is. Not reduce it by saying, well, there's us and there's them, and when the people that are wanting to have us and them, and the cause that's where our problems are coming from, are not the people we need in the office now. We need the people that bring more of us into the we, because the only way we're going to take on the problems that we face locally, nationally, and globally is to have a togetherness.
Well, we getting near the end of the program now, and time really moves. But I have to have Dr. Rudd make a comment. He spoke about professionalism, and pursuit of the truth and so forth. And you have demonstrated that. And you're not only county, you're probably nationally known, for the pursuing the truth. But why is there so much criticism as you're being unprofessional and irresponsible?
No good deeds go unpunished. Is what I like to say. Well, I think what happened was that statement was made during the Fox Lake investigation.
Okay.
And the individual who was running that likes to run a tight ship and doesn't like any information out. And try to make this real quick, I was actually trying to help him by giving the press a little bit of information, basically confirming that a single gunshot killed him.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I didn't check with the commander, and he misinterpreted it. Luckily, we resolved that issue, and we did find out the truth, thanks to the FBI. But that was the main reason.
And because of that, you have to run as independent now. We won't get into the details on that. But,
the Republican Party of Lake County decided they had 3 individuals, I won't mention them, but they've run for office, and they now have ancillary roles in the GOP of Lake County. They challenged my petitions, and they pointed out some mistakes I made. And since I run on professionalism, integrity, and honesty, the mistakes I made of signing some of my petition sheets that I did not circulate, I withdrew because you said I violated a election code rule, and I stepped down, and that now requires me to run as an independent, and I need at least 10,000 signatures. So you'll see me around the county asking for a signature so I can get on the ballot for November 8th.
Please. Dr. Rudd has been heroic. I just want to say the Illinois rules for getting on the ballot are some of the most difficult, strictest to deal with in the country. My own ballots were challenged. My own signatures were challenged. So how much time do we have to get those?
We have till June 27th. Okay, so we have about 7.5 weeks, 7 weeks.
Now, Dr. Rudd is very active in the community of Lake, and but what about Attorney Stanton? Are you reaching out to the community to let people know? I know I'm playing a part in it now to let people know that like 100,000 people, I told you, reviewing this program, the potentially 100,000 people, But what are you doing in the community? Are you all over the community? You're in certain areas? Or
well,
what?
We're putting
this
together.
This is a county.
We are putting together our staffing now, or fine tuning it. I've got a program that I'm going to release in a couple weeks called the Actual Innocence Program. That is going to be a proposal that's designed to stop the wrongful convictions before they become convictions. Then I'm modeling after St. Clair County Prosecutor's Office. And other than that, I'm going to be out there. Watch, keep your eyes on the prize, and I'll have some things announced. You mean as far as campaign rallies?
Yeah, being active out there so people know who you are,
Yeah, right now, we're in the planning stages and trying to do what we can to help Dr. Rudd get the signatures that he needs.
Generally, an election doesn't heat up until the first of the summer holidays. So generally around May 30th, everything starts.
Well, I want to thank you very much,
Thank you,
Attorney
Dr.
Stanton, Dr. Rudd.
It's always good to see you.
Good night seeing you again. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Dr. Thomas Rudd, coroner for Lake County, and Attorney Matthew Stanton, counselor at law. And we mentioned that these are people you should know. And we've been talking about justice in Lake County, especially pertaining to the office that they they are pursuing. And congratulations again on Dr. Rudd, who's received the Illinois Association of Law Enforcement Executives Executive of the Year. This is fantastic to be recognized, and I thought people really should know about this. Each one of you have been free to talk about your careers, how you got involved in the career and so forth, and so Lake County should know who you are. And I know it's a difficult persuasion because this is a Lake County position that you're pursuing. And by the way, the Lake County Board don't have any control of your office, except for one thing. They control your budget.
That's correct.
That's right, Dr. Right.
So they do have control.
Like having an extra wife.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right.
It's a big county, as you pointed out. It's the third biggest in Illinois,
And one of the wealthiest in the country, right?
Third wealthiest.
The third wealthiest in the
Third
country,
wealthiest.
yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to tune in on Community Forum, and we'll see you next Thursday. We view every Thursday at 7 o'clock, Channel 17. This has been Community Forum. My name is Dr. Wardell Brooks Sr., your host.